Hello everyone, I'm about to do a demonstration of opening up an old Mac Plus. I get pretty nostalgic about these old Mac Pluses. They're a bit of fun, the older Mac machines. And I just thought, just to entertain myself, I might just open it up and film it in the process. The first thing I want to do is start with a nice flat surface and then get yourself a towel. Really important, protects the surface that you're working on and also protects the computer. So here's my trusty old Mac Plus. Now this is, as you can see, it's in pretty rough condition. It's very yellow. I bought this one on eBay. It was actually sold as a unit that wasn't working, but to my surprise when I got it home, it was actually working perfectly. And here you can see there's been an Apple sticker on there for a really long time, which has left that indelible mark. That's what the colour of the case used to be, and that's what the colour is now. The Mac Plus basically came out in January of 1986. It addressed some of the issues with the earlier Macintosh. The first Macintosh that came out in 1984, the Macintosh 128K, it didn't have a lot of memory and no expandability. The next Mac that they brought out, which was the 512K, 4 times the amount of memory as the original, but still no expandability. But the Macintosh Plus, it addressed that issue, coming out with 1 megabyte of RAM, but also being expandable all the way up to 4 megabytes of RAM. And back in those days, no one could even imagine what you could do with 4 megabytes of RAM. So it was a pretty big advancement. The other big difference between this Mac and the Macs that preceded it was the floppy drive. This one had an 800K floppy drive. The original ones had a 400K floppy drive. And the 400K used the Macintosh file system, or MFS. When they started adding hard drives to these things, they needed to come up with something better, and they came up with the hierarchical, or HFS, hierarchical file system, which is basically named because it recognized file hierarchies. The other really big difference with this one is the addition of the SCSI port. Now this is the SCSI, or Small Computer System Interface, which enabled you to attach external hard drives. You could attach up to 7 external devices, and of course in the future you're also able to attach scanners and you name it. There were lots of things available using the SCSI port. And up until this point, the old Macs allowed you to have an external floppy drive but no external hard drive. And of course, if you were to buy one of these without any sort of external hard drive or external floppy drive, all you had was that one floppy drive at the front, which meant that you had to have your operating system and the files that you wanted to use and your applications all on the one disk, or you would have to boot up with the system, eject the system, put in your application disk, load up your application. When you came to save it, eject your application disk, put in your files disk, save your files, and it was just forever disk swapping. And then, you know, the big step was, of course, to have an external floppy drive, so you could have your system in one and your applications in the other, or system in one and files in the other. And then, of course, came the hard drive, and then that, of course, as we know, took off rather well with the computer industry. So what we have here is we've got a little headphone socket there. We have, that's the mouse port. This is the DE9 port. It's the same as what was used on the Macintosh 128K, 512K, even on the Lisa, and it was also used on the Apple II. If you wanted to attach a mouse to it, they had the same sort of mouse with this plug. The next computer to come after this, which was the Mac SE, it introduced the ADB, or Apple Desktop Bus. And that enabled you to connect to your keyboard and mouse using the same sort of plug, and they stuck with that for a long time. They stuck with that until the iMac came out in August of 1998. So that's the mouse port there. Then that's the external floppy drive port, and as mentioned before, that is the SCSI port there. There's your printer and your modem port there, and so they are both basically just serial ports there. As you can see, this has got the familiar 9-inch 512 by 342 pixel monochrome screen built in. Again, one of the criticisms about this always was how small the screen was, but of course it was a very high resolution screen at the time. Okay, so let's have a look at opening this up. Now, one of the most obvious things is, of course, make sure it is unplugged. unplug it, switch it off, make sure that it's not plugged into the mains power. I should also say that any damage that occurs to you or to your computer is your own responsibility. If you are deciding that you want to open one of these up, it actually can be very dangerous. There are high voltages inside, and there are lots of things that you could potentially do to hurt yourself and your computer. So you do it at your own risk, and I accept no responsibility if you hurt yourself, or more importantly, if you hurt your Mac Plus. Okay, so to start off with, if you want to open it up, you're going to need one of these. It's a T15 Torx Driver. You can generally pick these up at electronics stores, hardware stores. Once upon a time, the whole Torx wrench was a very difficult thing to find, but these days they're everywhere. A lot of devices are using them, designed to just make it a little bit harder for you to get into the device. So to open this up, we're going to need to start off with these two screws here, and I'll just undo those now. Okay, so you've got two little black screws here with a very fine thread on them, and those are the ones that go into the bottom section here. So I'll put those aside. Then, as you can see, the advantage of having it on a towel is you can spin it around nice and easily. Then you've got two screws. I'll just lift this up. Two screws inside here, right down there and right down there. So your Torx wrench needs to be reasonably long so that it can actually go right down there and that you can still get some sort of purchase on it. So that goes in. Once you feel that's actually grabbed, fallen into the screw there, we'll just undo it. Okay, that's that one. If you don't have a magnetic screwdriver, the screw is going to stay in there, but that's not a problem. So undo that one. Okay, that one's undone as well. Now if you want to get them out, you just pick the computer up and you just tip the computer up like this, and out they come. Okay, now there is one more screw to do on this computer, and you'll find it inside the battery cover. Now, we just lift this battery cover off. This is the battery that keeps the time and various settings for the computer, or also known as the parameter RAM. And this is the part of the RAM that actually requires power to retain information after you switch the computer off. If you look at the case without a battery there, you might think, well, I can just stick a AA in there. But in actual fact, you can't. The battery that you need for that is a 4.5 volt alkaline battery. They go under the code of A21PX or 523 or 1306A. They're all basically the same thing, and they're still quite readily available these days, because it's my understanding that they're also used in some digital cameras. So if you jump onto the net and do a bit of a search, you will find replacement batteries for these even today. So we now need to undo this last little screw here. This is the same as the last two screws we took out, which are this chrome color with quite a wide thread on them. Okay, so 5 screws taken out. The next step is to open the case up. Now, if you've done this lots of times, often the case will actually come up quite easily. It's not too hard, just apply a little bit of pressure here and there. But if it's never been opened before, they can be incredibly difficult to open up. Now, it might seem very tempting to just grab a screwdriver and slot him into here and give him a little bit of a twist to pry that open. I recommend you don't do that, because this is quite soft plastic, and if you do, I can guarantee you will end up with a couple of little notch marks in there from the pressure of the screwdriver. But getting these open, I recommend one of these. These you could just pick up from hardwares or from dollar shops. They're dirt cheap, and they've got this sort of quite wide head, which you can then just place into that slot and just give a bit of a squeeze, and you can see that starting to separate already. And then we do the same down the side, a bit of a squeeze, and this is now coming off nice and easily. I'm going to flip this back down onto its front and just lift that case up off the top there. An interesting point of note, this is fairly well known, but inside the case you will find a whole series of signatures pressed into the plastic there, and they're signatures of all of the people at Apple worked on the Macintosh. You'll find obviously the names that you would know from there, people like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, but obviously other very important people involved in the creation of the Macintosh. So if you decide you want to go and look at all the signatures, go for your life, but there's only so many times you can look at the same signatures. Okay, so now let's have a look at the inside. And you basically got the following parts inside the computer. You've got the CRT or cathode ray tube here. You've got this side here is what's referred to as the analog board, which provides the power supply and sends a signal to the CRT. And then you've got here the motherboard, and the motherboard is all of the brains of the outfit. These are connected via this ream of cables here, and that ream of cables supplies power from here to the motherboard, and it also supplies the image to then be sent to the cathode ray tube. You've also got a floppy drive in here, as mentioned before. This is 800K floppy drive connected with this one cable there, and that's pretty much the internals. Now, a point of note I'd like to make about this analog board here is there are lots of capacitors on this, which means it can actually retain voltage even after it's been disconnected from the power. So for the sake of safety, I recommend that if you are going to open one of these up, switch it off and leave it off overnight, because if you happen to touch the wrong thing, you get yourself a really nasty shock or a nasty burn. And in particular, this device here, which is called the flyback transformer, sending voltage to the CRT, it is sending huge voltages, and if you happen to get that zap, as I say, it can be very dangerous, very painful, and I highly recommend against it. So do be careful when working around here. The other thing to remember is that this is all glass here, very easy to damage, and so be very, very careful around the CRT there. So anyhow, as I say, switch them off the night before. Very important, yes. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the motherboard out. Now, in order to do that, we've got to remove a couple of cables. So what we've got here is we've got the floppy drive cable. So that just comes out there like that, pretty easy. Then you've got the power cable here. That just pulls out, pretty straightforward. And now there's nothing holding that motherboard in place apart from this groove down the side. So we take off this cover. This is just foil and paper there. Nothing particularly interesting going on there. We'll take that off. And there we have the motherboard. To lift it out, it's just a matter of grabbing it reasonably firmly on either side and pulling it up. Slides out, nice and easy. And then on the motherboard here, you can see there's all the plug holes we were looking at before from the outside. And then on the inside here, we have that's the CPU there, that's the main chip, that's the Motorola 68,000 or 68K chip. This one was used on the original, this sort of chip was used on the original Mac 128K and the Mac 512K. Used obviously in the Mac Plus. It was also used in the Mac SC, which came out after the Plus. It was used in the first Mac Portable. It was used in the Mac Classic, which came out in 1990. And when you consider that the first Macintosh came out in 1984, and the Mac Classic was discontinued in 1992, that's 8 years that they used this CPU for. Now, it was, of course, it was quite a CPU when it started off, but by the time it was released in the Macintosh Classic, it was getting pretty tired. And the Macintosh Classic was not a particularly powerful computer for its time. So that's the big chip there is the CPU. Then down here you've got the memory. This one here has 4 of these SIMs, or single inline memory modules. They are 30-pin SIMs. Now, as I said before, the really important thing about this Mac is it was expandable. Now, this one here has already been expanded up to 4 megabytes. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 1 megabyte SIMs in place. If you'd have bought one of these originally, it would have come with 4 256 kilobyte, which all joined together gave us the 1 megabyte. If you have a look here, you can actually see that there is a little spot for a resistor. These little guys here are resistors, so there would have been a resistor running across there. It says RAM size, and you can see it there says 256K bit. So if that resistor was there, this motherboard would be expecting there to be 4 256K SIMs. If you wanted it to address 1 megabyte SIMs, such as this, you have to remove that resistor. And of course, obviously, if you compare that to the way memory upgrades are done these days, I mean, very rarely would you actually have to cut resistors in this day and age when you upgrade a computer. But that was necessary. There was also a spot there for 1 row. So if you wanted this to be a 1 megabyte computer with only 1 SIM in there, you would have a resistor on the 1 row there, which would enable it to address just 1 row of memory there. So that's basically it. The only other things on here is we have our little interrupt switches, which could be accessed from the outside of the case via a paperclip in the side. And there were actually little switches that you could attach to the outside of the case, which enabled you to access those without the need of a paperclip. But this one doesn't have one of those. So if I wanted to use either the program's interrupt or the reset button, I would actually have to do it by poking a paperclip in the side. And that's probably all there is to know about this particular motherboard. So now let's have a look at the analog board. Now, on the side of the analog board here, you'll see there's a whole series of writing, and obviously the warnings here about the high voltage. That there is the speaker. There was no hole on the outside of the case for the speaker, so the sound was, fairly muffled. When they brought out the Mac Classic, they actually brought it out with some little holes on the side so that the sound could actually get out the side of the case. But in here we've basically got a few adjustments for the display. The adjustments we have here, we have a brightness cutoff, we have a focus, we have a width setting there, we have a height setting there, and then a voltage adjustment there, a minor voltage adjustment there. So you could actually adjust the display, because a lot of these computers, particularly when they get old, the display would actually start to shrink in the screen there. And what you could do is you could adjust the width and the height to actually expand it to fill that area again. Now, of course, making those adjustments can only be done if you've actually got power to the thing while the case is off. And that's pretty dangerous, so again, I don't recommend that. I'm a risky person, so I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, so I'm going to put the motherboard back on, and then I'm going to fire it up. So, basically go through the same process but in reverse. Here's our motherboard, and we've got a slot down here, a slot down here, and you just need to line the board up with those slots, and then with a little bit of pressure, just push him in, and then you've basically got here these little tongues that need to go into the little hole there. That'll just slot in, and that's it. That's as far as it needs to go. The next step is to reconnect the 2 cables. Now, with the power cable, this can only go on one way. You've got a little blocked off hole there, and then on the motherboard you've actually got a little gap in the prongs. So you just have to make sure that the hole and the gap line up as you push this in. And that's in. Then we've got the floppy cable, and that just goes into a little plug hole there. So that's connected up again, and then we've got our little bits of paper and foil. I'll pop him on as well. Okay, so I'm going to sit him upright. And then I'm going to connect up some power. Once again, I cannot stress enough how dangerous this is. If you decide to do it, you are an idiot. Okay, so that's plugged in. And I'm just going to switch it on. The familiar bong. And then shortly we should end up with at the moment it's just checking the memory, and then it will bring up the little flashing question mark to show that it hasn't got an operating system, because once again this has no internal hard drive, so unless it has a floppy disk in the drive, it won't be able to start up because it has no system to start up from. So there's our little flashing question mark letting us know that it wants us to do something. And I have an old Macintosh System Tools disk, System 6.08, which I found in a cupboard, and pop that in, and we get the little happy face and that very familiar sound of the floppy drive being read, used in lots and lots of movies in the late 80s and the early 90s. That was the sound effect often used in Hollywood for a computer of any shape or form. And then of course the welcome to Macintosh, and then the Finder or the desktop. We got pretty excited about this back in the olden days. Okay, so that's the Macintosh up there. As I say, if you wanted to adjust the screen, you could do that using the adjustment controls on the side, just watching what's happening while you're making the adjustments until you get that display filling the screen nice and, sort of good size and centered, and most importantly square. You want to make it so that it doesn't elongate things in either direction. And that's basically it. So now I'm going to put the back on and finish with a computer that's all back together again. So first thing I'm going to do is switch it off once again and unplug it. Back down on his face. Case goes back on, just slides over top like that. Push him down nice and firmly. 2 black screws at the bottom. One chrome screw in the battery holder. Let's do those up. And then with these ones here, because they have to go through this hole, you don't want them to turn up around the wrong way. I mean, if they do, it doesn't matter, you just tip it up and let them fall out. But what I generally do is I'll just sort of hold them down there with one finger until they get close to the hole, and then let go of them and just hope they fall in the right way. Yes, and they both fell in the right way. I'm feeling very happy. Do them up. And battery cover back on. And there's my Mac all back together again. Hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and I hope you enjoyed the trip down memory lane.